Right, I think we'll start now. So thank you everybody for joining us for this customer success webinar. I'd like to introduce Dan, who is Gainsight's Chief Customer Officer. And in that role, he has ultimate responsibility for Gainsight's customer satisfaction and success. Dan is recognized as an expert and thought leader within the customer success field, and brings that thought leadership into execution at Gainsight, both in the customer success organization and with their products. I'm very pleased that he's joining us today to talk about scaling a customer success team, and also hiring for customer success as a business scales. So you will have the opportunity to ask questions. So please do ask questions through the chat, either to myself or Dan, or even through the Q&A option at the bottom. So whenever you're ready, Dan, you can take it away.
Great, I'm ready. Thanks, Jordan. Appreciate it. Welcome to everybody who's on the call. If some of you are in the UK like I am, you're probably wondering why you're sitting inside doing a webinar when you could be outside getting a sunburn on one of these rare days. But anyway, thank you for, I guess, double thanks for joining me on a day where you'd probably rather be outside. But happy to be part of the Notion family, and also welcome to those who are part of the Gainsight family, New Voice Media and Go Cardless. So anyway, thank you, Jordan, for the introduction. Let's talk for a second about the agenda, and then I'll reintroduce myself. So we're going to talk about scaling and hiring today. Both of those are pretty big subjects, so obviously we're not going to get too deep on either one of those, but I will go into some depth on scaling and then talk a little bit about how to hire for customer success as well. And I'll try to leave 10 minutes or so at the end for Q&A. I'm sure a bunch of you will have questions. So let's get started. So welcome to the Notion family. I'm really proud to be part of the Notion family, I guess, as an advisor or whatever the terminology that they use. I am currently actually general manager of EMEA. Jordan used my older title, Chief Customer Officer. That's what I did for the first 3 years at Gainsight. But now, having moved to London, I'm general manager of our EMEA operation, trying to build up our European business. And so far, so good. Prior to Gainsight, I was VP of Customer Success at Marketo. So below that picture of me is a couple of things. One is our mission statement as a company, to be living proof that you can win in business by being human first. It's actually pretty unique, right? We really think about not just driving business results, but really valuing ourselves as human beings and all of our customers, our investors, our families, et cetera. And that's not to say that nobody else values their family and their customers, but we really want to be kind of a company that sets a new standard for doing that. And then at the bottom, on all of our presentations, we talk about very briefly about our core values. Those are our 5 core values at the bottom. For those of you who have been to Gainsight events, you'll know that we try to inject a little childlike joy into everything we do, because the journey is the destination, at least our belief. So childlike joy is a little harder to do in a webinar, but maybe if I get a chance, I'll throw a couple of jokes at you. So anyway, let's get going. So Gainsight as a company, many of you know this, but we basically developed a customer success software platform. So our mission is to enable you to deliver predictable outcomes and experiences for your customers and sustainable growth for your business, under the idea that our customers are the new growth engine. We live in this subscription economy or consumption economy, and that's more true than ever, where our customers are not just referenceable people who we hope do their maintenance renewals, but actually help us grow our business. And so our impact, at least our proposed impact, is at least a 5% net retention and growth rate. We did write the book. Many of you probably have it or have read it. If not, I think it's worth reading. It's been amazingly successful. I did a lot of the writing myself, and I'm always blown away when I see 25,000 copies sold and translating into 2 languages that I've never spoken in my life. So it's quite interesting how big the customer success movement is. This is really not about us writing a book. It's about the whole customer success movement that all of you are a part of, and it's sweeping across Europe just as it has in the US, and has made its way at least to Brazil and Portugal, as well as Japan. So just an interesting statement about the amazing opportunity we have in the field of customer success. So let's dive in and start talking about how to scale customer success. So what does the word scale mean? Well, I looked it up today, and I was not very satisfied with the definition. The closest definition I could find to what we usually mean when we say scale is to progress in a graduated series. That's a fairly boring definition of scale. What do we usually mean when we say scale? We mean this: to grow, and usually really fast. And many of you are in companies that are doing that. The unwritten part of that definition, I think, for us is this: that is to grow really fast, but do that with financial prudence. That's the underlying understanding. I think our investors, our CEOs, our executive teams all want to grow and usually grow really fast. But without saying it, that means we can't just grow. We have to actually do that with financial prudence. And that's really important. I'll talk about that in a second. When we think about scaling customer success, it's not just growing customer success. That would be easy to do if we had unlimited money. But please let me know if you have unlimited money, because I'll come and help you spend some of it. We certainly don't. So we have to be financially prudent about it. So let's talk about what that means. So scaling customer success, I think, starts with this understanding that all of our customers aren't the same. All customers are not created equal. And so if you've ever seen a Gainsight presentation before, I think it's an obligation on our part to show our pyramid. And so the pyramid is representative of almost any company's customers, in that all of your customers are not the same. And we typically end up with a fairly small number of high value customers, like kind of the 80-20 rule, if you will. Then obviously some kind of mid-range or mid-market kinds of customers. And then at the bottom of the pyramid, especially if you're a SaaS company, we almost always end up with a long tail of low value customers. And so when we talk about scaling customer success, oftentimes we go immediately to that long tail. How do we manage hundreds or thousands of customers with a very small expense? But the reality is, as you get bigger, you're going to have more of those high value customers as well. And you need to get more efficient in how you manage them, not just your lower value or lower tier of customers, but the mid-range and the high value customers as well. So start off with this mental picture. Whether you've formally decided that your customers are different or not, the reality is they are, and you're probably already treating them differently. Almost by definition, we end up giving more attention to our high value, kind of higher paying customers. So even if you haven't consciously segmented your customers, you're probably still treating them differently. So start off with this picture in mind. So when we say scale, we're talking about that whole pyramid getting bigger, not just the bottom part of it getting bigger. So what's the first step in scaling customer success? To me, the first step is segmenting your customers. And as I said, even if you haven't consciously done this, you've almost certainly unconsciously done this. We just naturally pay more attention, spend more time with our higher value customers. And for many companies, because they haven't found an automated way of dealing with that long tail, they essentially ignore them. Because given a choice, you're going to pay attention to your higher paying customers, and you're going to ignore or at least spend less time with your lower paying customers. But you have to start with segmenting them. And I think it's really important that you consciously do this, because otherwise customers will segment themselves. And that means the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? So your smaller customers, if they yell at you enough or email your CEO enough, may get just as much attention as your bigger customers. And that's because you haven't consciously segmented them. You're just reacting to whatever they think they need. So one of the questions here is, why segment your customers? I was just explaining that, I think, but I want to really talk about it a little bit more. So think about this question. Should we segment our customers? And if we do that, do we do that to benefit them, or do we do that to benefit us? So think about that for a second. I'll answer that question in a minute. But why segment your customers? The answer is really simple. It's because you can't afford to treat all customers alike. They are not created equal, and you just can't afford to give all of your customers that ideal white glove, red carpet, whatever you want to call it, treatment. It's just too expensive to do that. And we'll talk some more about that, but you just can't afford to treat all your customers alike. So back to that question of who are you segmenting for? The answer is we're segmenting for ourselves, not for our customers. Customers don't want to be segmented. There's no customer that's raising their hand saying, gee, could you please put me in your bottom segment and don't treat me like I'm important? There's no customer saying that. All customers would love to be in that top category, treated like kings or given that white glove treatment. But for most of us, we just can't afford to treat them all the same. If they're paying me £1 million a year, I can afford to do a lot more for them than if they're paying me £1,000 a year. So think about when you're segmenting customers, it's not for their benefit, it's for ours. And the reality is that your segmentation model is actually a financial model, because what you're going to do is structure the way you deal with each of your segments in such a way that it becomes affordable or financially prudent, to go back to the definition that I did earlier. So keep that in mind as well. Your segmentation model is actually a financial model. So here's my advice on segmenting. Almost all companies that I know, and I've talked to literally thousands of them, segment primarily on two factors. First factor is how much money are they paying me? That's a natural segmentation. Like I said, that happens whether you're consciously segmenting your customers or not. The other factor that's really, really common, and we do this at Gainsight, is to put into our top segment those customers who have the most opportunity or the most potential. In other words, not only how much are they paying you, but how much could they be paying you? So for example, if IBM is one of your customers, they may not be paying you very much, but the likelihood is there's a big opportunity there, and you would probably push them into your top segment because of that opportunity. That's the way we think about it. Now, there's an optional third, fourth, fifth segments as well. I would recommend you don't go beyond 3. Sometimes the third option might be, are they in an industry that's particularly important to you or maybe unimportant? Or are they a brand that has really, really high brand recognition and you want to treat them in your higher segment because of that? That usually, by the way, goes hand in hand with opportunity. Like if Google was a customer of yours, that brand is obviously very recognizable. You might want to really make sure they're referenceable, but they're probably in your top segment also because there's a huge opportunity just because they're a big company. And I strongly recommend that you don't overthink it. It's easy to come up with 7 or 8 different ways to segment, but it gets too complicated and you can't keep it up to date and everyone will get confused. And then you're playing favorites and your CEO says, well, can't we squeeze these 3 more customers into our top segment? It's hard to say no to a CEO, but if you have an agreement on the lines that you're drawing between segments and the reasons for that segmentation, you can try to hold the line on that a little bit better. So don't overthink it, but start with a simple model that says, how much are they paying us? How much could they be paying us? And let's do 3 segments. I recommend 3 because more than that gets pretty complicated as well. So that's our recommended segmentation model. And this is the beginning of figuring out how to scale. So the next step is really how to scale. So I'm going to segment my customers, and I'm, for purposes of this discussion, just calling them high touch, mid touch, and tech touch. That is the way we think about our segments. And so once I do that segmentation, I need to map out how I'm going to engage with those customers. And I like to think about it this way. If I don't map out the customer journey, or what I call the engagement model, the customer will map it out for themselves. And they will demand to be treated in a certain way that might not fit what you'd like to do for them. But unless you take ownership of that journey and explain it to the customer and make it part of the way you do business, the customers will demand a different engagement model than what you're willing to give them or what you can afford to give them. So it's really important that you don't segment for the purposes of segmentation. You segment so you can decide how you're going to treat each of those segments, and in particular, how you're going to treat them differently. Remember, this is a financial model. So I'm going to map out an engagement model that says, hey, because those high touch, high value customers are paying me a lot of money, I can afford to talk to them frequently and do lots of one-on-one interactions with them. but as I go down the pyramid, I'm going to have to be more financially prudent about it. So in order to make scale a reality, a real possibility for your customer success team, you have to start here by segmenting and then mapping your engagement model for each of those segments, because that's what allows you to scale. So how do I get started on this process of mapping out an engagement model? Well, here's my recommendation. And again, this maybe doesn't sound like we're talking about scaling, but we are, because you cannot possibly scale unless you really have a firm grasp on how you're going to model out each of your segments. So I recommend that you start with a model for your highest touch, highest value customer segment, because that will allow you then to take that model and morph it for your other segments. And let me talk about what I mean by that. So I'm going to show you an example engagement model. It's one that we've kind of roughly used at Gainsight, although we've morphed it a little bit. So start off with the kind of maturity curve or the life cycle of a customer. In this case, we're looking maybe at a 1 or 2 year customer where we land them, we get a contract signature, so we've landed them, then they go through an onboarding process. Then we start to focus on adoption. And then we also, once we get them adopting our product, we think about expansion and obviously renewal at some point. So that's the life cycle of the customer. Above the life cycle, I'm going to talk about specific interactions with the customer that we refer to as proactive, or think about them as date-driven. So I know that I'm going to touch customers at certain points in time, and I'm going to map that out, and I'm going to refer to those as proactive touches. And then below the life cycle, the chevrons that you see below that, I'm going to map out my reactive touch points as well, or what I call data-driven touch points. And those are going to be touch points that are driven by changes in the data. So I'm reacting to the data, although the actual interaction with the customer might still very well feel proactive to them. So let me show you what I mean. And each of these is color-coded. So here's an example of some set of proactive touches with the customer. And again, by proactive, I mean date-driven. Like I can just look at a calendar and say, I'm going to do these things, and I know when I'm going to do them. I'm going to do the kickoff meeting within a week after I sign the customer. We're going to do a strategy / discovery session within a week after that. Some point 2 months in, I'm going to do a health check. When we close onboarding, I'm going to do a meeting there. I'm going to do EBRs. I'm going to go through a renewal process. Again, this is an example, but it's probably not a bad starting point for some of you. These are all things that I can actually put on a calendar. I know when they're going to happen, or at least I know relatively when they're going to happen, 2 weeks after kickoff, or every single quarter I'm going to do an EBR or whatever. And you notice that these are blue. The boxes are blue. And if you look at the legend up on the top, it says the one-to-one touches are in blue. So all of these, for my high-touch customers at least, are going to be one-on-one, meaning the CSM or somebody is going to talk to that customer one-on-one. It could be many-to-many. It could be more than one person, but it's essentially a person-driven conversation. Okay, so those are proactive, calendar-driven, one-to-one touches. Now I'm going to add to that some additional outreaches that are also calendar-driven, and these are the ones that are in purple, but these are going to be one-to-many, meaning there's some automation involved. So the first thing the customer might get after they sign with us is a welcome email. No one-to-one touch there, it's one-to-many. Every customer might get the same email. Maybe there's some personalization to it, but it's automated. So it's not a one-to-one situation. And then you can see some of the other ones, surveys, things like that you can do through an automated program, emails, surveys, webinars, et cetera. And you have to start thinking about, even for your highest touch customers, that some of those touch points are going to be automated. That's the way you're going to get more efficient at dealing with those customers. So that's the above the line, calendar-driven, date-driven, proactive touches that you can map out on a calendar. Now let's look at below the line. That's what we call reactive. Reactive, again, meaning reacting to the data. So these are data-driven touch points. So here's some that are risk. Risk is the ones in red. So you want to think about your customers, at least in these two ways. There's going to be some risk that happens. There's going to be some opportunity that happens. Hopefully you can see both of those elements through the digital footprint that they leave you. So you can see some of the red ones here: low adoption, low survey score, way too many support tickets, your champion leaves the company, et cetera, things like that. Things that you guys know are going to happen. You just don't know when. That's why we call them data-driven. I know for sure that for some customers, all of these things are going to happen, but I don't know when they're going to happen. But I want to make sure I have a plan in place to intervene when they do happen. And then there's also a set of opportunities. So increase in usage might be an opportunity to sell more or to get them to do a case study. Same thing with a positive survey result. You know, case studies are great. References, are you going to be in our reference database? And some of these green ones might lead to opportunities to sell more. Like if I sell you 100 licenses, when you deploy your 90th license, I might want a trigger that goes off and says, hey, someone should call that customer and see if they need more licenses. So again, proactive on the top, reactive on the bottom, meaning data-driven on the bottom, and the difference between one-to-one touch and one-to-many. So the risks and opportunities you can also break into one-to-many or one-to-one. So I put the blue boxes and purple boxes around those kind of randomly. Any of those could be one-to-one touch. Any of those also could be automated, because you could create an email that goes out to somebody, for example, that had lots of support tickets around reporting, and point them to the on-demand training on how to use reporting better, something like that. So remember, the ones below the line, they're either risk or opportunity, but you also need to think through, are you going to do them are you going to do them through a one-to-one touch or through a potentially one-to-many or automated touch? So that looks really complicated, but if you think through it, it's not that complicated. There's probably a lot more touch points. For your high touch customers above the line, I'd probably have monthly meetings also on my list of calendar driven events. And I might have more kind of data driven events as well. And by the way, I'll send all these slides out to Jordan, and he can forward them to all of you. So you'll have this. This could be a good kind of template for thinking through what your engagement model should look like. So as you go down the pyramid, you have two levers to reduce costs. Frequency, that slide was supposed to be deleted. So as you go down the pyramid, you've got two levers to reduce the cost of your interactions with your customers. The first lever is frequency. And keep in mind that never is a frequency, right? So think about those touch points that I just showed you on that chart. As you go down, let's say that's your high touch model. As you go down to mid touch and tech touch, to reduce cost, which you have to do, one of the ways to do that is reduce the frequency. So I said, for example, with our high touch customers, I might do monthly meetings. When I go down to my mid touch customers, I probably have to change that to quarterly, or maybe even not regularly scheduled, but only data-driven meetings. And just remember that it's an option to not do some of those things. That's one of your ways of reducing costs. If I say for my high touch customers, I'm going to do quarterly business reviews, I might say for my tech touch customers, I'm not going to do any business reviews. I just can't afford to do that. I'm going to send them an email that gives them some of that same information, but I'm not going to do any of them. So that's what I mean when I say never is a frequency. You cannot do some of these things as a way of reducing costs. And the second lever is automation. So you could do, for your high touch customers, you could do that welcome meeting where it's the sales rep handing off to the CSM, and the project manager for the onboarding team is also on that call. So it's really a love fest with the customer. We're going to take good care of you. Here's the people who are going to guide you through the next steps, et cetera, et cetera. But as you go down the pyramid, you might say, you know what, that's an expensive meeting. 3 people on our end for an hour, that's too much. Let's reduce the cost. And maybe we even reduce it by automating it. So now it's just the welcome email that outlines the process and who's going to be involved and what they should expect next, as an example. So think about these two things as a way of reducing your costs. So this is why I say start with your high touch segment, because you're going to map that out. It's going to be pretty people driven typically. And you're going to probably, ideally, would love to follow that same segment or that same engagement model with your lower touch customers. So what you do is you say, that's a really good model. Now I'm going to reduce the frequency of some of those, and I'm going to automate some of those. And that's the way I'm going to reduce costs. as I go down my pyramid. You will probably get to the point where some of your customers are in that lower tier and you actually never talk to them. Everything you do is automation. Could be webinar, could be pointing them to your community or your online self-service portal or email campaigns, et cetera. But you have to figure out as you go down the pyramid how to reduce cost. And these are your two levers. Hope that makes sense. A couple things that these are not really scaling, but I wanted to play this whole thing out so you guys get it. So segment your customers, map out the engagement model for each of your segments. The next step in building a customer success team is figuring out what headcount do I need. So if I go back, sorry, this will take a few clicks for me to get back there, but I'm going to go back to my segmentation or my engagement model. I can take this and I can say, you know what? I know exactly how many times each of the things above the line are going to happen and how long they take. And I can estimate how often the things below the line are going to happen and how long those are going to take. So I can literally add up the number of hours, approximate, but probably pretty good, the number of hours that it's going to take to support one particular customer in this particular model. So if I can do that for one customer, I can obviously extrapolate that and do that for lots of customers. So that is why I say that your engagement model across your segments now becomes your headcount model, because I can use that engagement model to estimate how many headcount I'm going to need. So I know that in the course of a year, one high touch customer, I'm going to literally have a CSM spend 95 hours with them during the year. And so if I have 20 of those customers, I can quickly do the math and say, I need 11 people or whatever that number might be. Now, the first time you do this, you're going to run the headcount math and you're going to set maths, and you're going to say, I need 39 people. And your CFO is going to say, I'll give you 4. That's all I can afford to give you. Now, what's really cool is you can show them that engagement model, your CFO, and say, okay, if I only have 4 people, I need to cut down my cost. Which of these things do you think we should stop doing or do less frequently? And now you're engaging your CFO or your boss or your CEO in the conversation about how to manage your customers. And what they're saying to you when they're going to give you fewer headcount than you want is, I'm willing to accept more risk than what you've built into your model. Because every single one of those touch points that you take away or do less frequently is going to increase the risk of churn for that customer. Now, it doesn't mean they will churn, but it is going to increase the risk slightly. So your engagement model rolls into your headcount model. And then the last step is you should have different retention targets for each of your segments. By definition, your tech touch customers are going to churn at a higher rate than your mid touch, which are going to churn at a higher rate than your high touch. That's a fundamental principle that everyone has to buy into. Your CEO can't say, I want all customers to be at least 90% retention. Well, if the high touch are at 90%, the mid touch and the tech touch can't be at 90%, because by definition, you're going to touch them less frequently and less one-on-one. And there's no way that they're better off with a less frequent or less one-on-one touch from you. So that that's part of this modeling of your customer success team, is establishing those retention targets by segment. So just to summarize, scaling your customer success team: segment your customers, build an engagement model for each segment, use that engagement model to drive your headcount model, and then create separate retention targets for each segment. So what else matters when it comes to scaling? There's a few things. One is, in your company, I can say this unequivocally, there's only one thing that really scales, and that is your product. So as you build customer success teams, or for those of you who are customer success managers, I give to you customer success law number 7. Product is your number 1 priority. Make sure every day you're thinking about how our product could be better, because the winner in the marketplace will be the product, the company that has the best product, period, end of sentence. I don't care how good you are at anything else. Your product will be the differentiator between you winning the marketplace and being second, third, or irrelevant. So customer success people have to prioritize the product. It is the only thing in your company that truly scales. So keep that high on your list. Secondly, think about time to value all the time. Literally obsess about it. Customer success law number 8, obsessively improve time to value. You have to have an urgency about everything you do with customers because the clock is always ticking. If we live in a subscription world, and most of us do, the clock moving towards that renewal date is always ticking. So time to value on every single thing we do is really important. And if we take that seriously and we drive that level of urgency, we're going to be much more scalable. We have to do this really, really well. Last but not least, think about self-service, because scaling requires that some of our customers get really good at taking care of themselves. And that's that tech touch part of the pyramid has to be really good at taking care of themselves, because they're not going to get nearly as much high touch from you. They're not going to get as much love from you. They're going to have to figure out how to do self-service. And by the way, they probably know that, given that they know they're buying your product for a lower price or not paying you as much as some other customers are. They probably know that they're not going to get the same level of service, and they're going to have to get better at self-service. So think about what that means for you. What does your self-service portal look like? What does your on-demand training library look like? What is your email campaign that is a substitution for talking to the customer to try to help them use your product better, et cetera. So self-service is a big part of doing, if you have that long tail of doing customer success really well. So that's kind of the scaling part of the conversation. So just to reiterate real quickly, make sure you think through segmenting your customers and building that engagement model, because that's the fundamental principle for scaling. You got to figure out what you can afford to do, and then how you're going to do it for that particular financial commitment from your company. And that financial commitment will never be as big as you want it to be. I don't think that's news to any of you. None of you have the headcount that you wish you had. I don't think any of you would raise your hand if I said, who has too few customers? That's just not the world we live in. We always have too many. There's always too much to do. So scaling is critical, and that requires you to own that customer journey, that customer engagement model. And the only way to own it is to map it out, tell your customers how you're going to manage them so that their expectations are properly set, and then live with that engagement model. And one of the important things, especially if you're a manager, is that engagement model allows you to give your people permission to say no. This is not something they naturally have. Customer success people want to help customers. So if I don't have a model and I'm a CSM, and one of my small customers calls me 9 days in a row, begging for my help, crying to me, or yelling at me on my voicemail, sooner or later, I'm going to pick up the phone and return that call. Now, if I have a model in front of me that says, for this level of customer, everything we do is tech touch, do not pick up the phone and call that customer, now I have permission to say no. And you need to give your people permission to say no. Otherwise, they will ultimately say yes. The squeaky wheel get the grease, because if I'm naturally inclined to wanting to help customers, I'm going to have a really hard time ignoring those voicemails that are begging me to help them out. So keep that in mind. Now, let's talk a little bit about hiring. Such a hot topic. Everyone's trying to figure out how to hire customer success people. What do I look for? Where do I find them, et cetera? So I'll share with you some of my opinions and my personal experience, having hired and managed a lot of customer success people in my day, and also helped a lot of other customer success leaders hire and profile people. So what is it that's required to be a great CSM? I think this is a really important question to answer. It might be a little bit different for each company, but I'm going to argue that a lot of things are pretty similar. And there's two parts to this, what's required to be a great CSM. One part is, what are the personal characteristics of a great CSM? The second part is, what are the skills of a great CSM? Those are very different things. So let's talk about each of them. So what are the personal characteristics of a great CSM? I think there's two. The first one is curiosity. A great CSM is naturally curious. They are not running off of a script. They are not just a robot who follows an engagement model or even a system like Gainsight that tells them today is the day to start working on that QBR, and here's the things we do in that QBR. Those are all good things, but they still have to bring their natural capabilities to the table. This is no different than sales. There are real skills involved in being a good salesperson, but there's also natural personal characteristics that matter a lot, right? You can't be the typical nerdy engineer type typically and be a great salesperson. It just doesn't fit. So this is true for CSMs too. And I think one of the most important characteristics is be naturally curious. And the second one is empathy. You really need to have this when you talk to customers. You need to be able to say, and honestly mean it, I know exactly how you feel. Those are easy words to say. The customer will know whether you actually mean it or not. You really have to have empathy. And you have to kind of live your life in an empathetic way. Like, my customers are hurting, I'm hurting. My customers are happy, I'm happy. Now, I don't mean that everyone should become obsessive, compulsive, and OCD and all those things, but you do have to kind of live the life with your customers. So I think these are the top level personal characteristics of a great CSM. So what are the skills? I usually think about skills as a three-legged stool. Now, again, this could vary a little from company to company, but I think for most companies, these are true. Skill number one is domain expertise. By the way, 3 or 4 years ago, I would have put this as skill number 3. I'm pretty convinced now this is the top level skill. A whole lot of our value to our customers and our conversations with our customers are not about our product. They're about the domain. So for Gainsight, a great CSM at Gainsight spends a lot of time talking about customer success management, not which buttons to push in Gainsight, not how to build a report in Gainsight, how to do customer success management. So each of you has a domain that you're in. Become a domain expert. You'll have a lot of high quality conversations with your customers where your product is never mentioned, but you will walk away with a lot of credibility if you're really good at this. Second one is really obvious, but it's true. You have to talk about it, and that is good customer facing skills. If you don't have good communication skills, if you're not good at reading people, if you don't prepare for calls and follow up on calls really well, you're not going to be successful. You have to have really good customer facing skills. And then the third skill that I put on my three-legged stool is product expertise. And again, I do think this can vary a little bit, but for the most part, if you're directly managing a customer as a CSM, you got to bring something to the table. And that kind of no-brainer something they expect from you is that you really understand your product at an expert level. And I don't mean that you coded it, but that you know how to use it at an expert level. That's the expectation of CSMs. So that's the three-legged stool that I always think of when I'm trying to hire customer success people. A few years ago, I did a presentation on the traits of a great CSM. And so I just wanted to share with you, and I'm not going to go through all of these. These are the 15 traits that I came up with. If you sat and looked at this, you'd probably come up with 5 more. But there's a bunch of things that a great CSM is great at. Now, I'll caution you when you look at this, remember I'm saying these are the traits of a great CSM, and not everyone is great at everything. There's nobody in the world that's great at all of these things. So I don't mean this to make people feel bad, like, oh, I'm not really good at thinking about sales, right? Well, maybe it's something to think about how to get better at, as opposed to beating yourself up about not being great at it. No one's great at all of these, but this is the set of things I came up with as I thought through what, if I put all the best qualities of all the great CSMs I've ever worked with together, what would I come up with? And this is kind of that list. So I'll just touch a couple of them. Great CSMs have to be great at prioritization because there's always too much to do. You have to be great at saying no. The caveat to that is you have to be great at saying no and still having the customer love you after you say no. So it's not just saying no. You can't just hold your hand up and say no, 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 no. You got to do it in a way that makes your customer understand and allows them to still care about you or still want to work with you. The one that some people kind of rub their head a little bit and say, duh, is when I say their craft. Great CSMs are great at their craft. That sounds like a no-brainer, but I use the word craft very carefully here. Craft, think about a hobby. Hobbies are things that we work on and we want to get better at, but nobody in the world cares except us, right? If I'm a painter in my part-time, nobody else really cares whether I'm good at that, but I do. So I work on it. And I think great CSMs work on things that nobody else really would notice that they didn't get better at, but they care and they notice. So I'll leave it there. Happy to talk more about this with anybody. A couple of other things just to do real quickly. Organizing for success. How do I organize? This is one of the questions that Jordan said had come up in the pre-conversations. This sounds like a simple question. Just show me the org chart that's perfect for customer success. And of course, my answer is I'm not going to do that because there is no perfect org chart. But I am going to point out a couple things that are pretty important. Organize to make a statement of importance. I often give this presentation to CEOs. So think about me saying this to your CEO. Organize your customer success team to make a statement of importance to the rest of the company. What do I mean by that? I mean, give them a VP title if they're running a large team of customer success people, and make them appear to the VP of sales. That says to the whole company, this is really important, this being customer success. This person is elevated to that level, is a peer on the org chart to the VP of sales. That says customer success is important. Second one, organize to create healthy tension. What do I mean by that? I want to set customer success up to put pressure on the other parts of the company, because I need to be able to do that. If I'm VP of customer success, I need to be able to put pressure on sales to say, stop telling our customers that they'll be up and running in 2 days. It takes 6 weeks. At least say 4 weeks, but don't say 2 days because it's not true and it sets us up for failure. And I need to go to the product VP and say, stop worrying about how the demo looks and actually make the product do what we say it can do, right? Things like that, or make the performance better because our customers aren't going to renew their contracts if the performance isn't better. So we need this healthy tension, and a really high functioning customer success team creates a lot of tension with other organizations. Now, it's important for that tension to stay healthy. In some ways, that's the CEO's job, is to make sure it's healthy. But if there's not tension, then you're not doing your job. Organize to benefit your customers, not you. It's easy to organize the way things are easiest for us. That's the wrong thought process. We got to organize to make the customer's experience the best it can possibly be, not ours. And then organize to provide clear accountability. When I say VP of customer success, I also want to say, and here's our retention number. You own it, go deliver it. Your job is on the line, just like the VP of sales has the sales number, and his job's on the line if he doesn't deliver that. Clear accountability, not some shared thing like, well, you kind of don't own renewals, but I want to measure you on renewals. No. Whether you own it or not, that's the number that I'm going to measure you on. So act like you own it, even if someone else is doing the contract signatures. Where do you find talent? Really tough question, because in a world where not enough people have customer success manager in their resume, we need to find talent in other places. There's a few places. I think ex-sales people, if they really truly want to change careers, can be really good customer success managers. Now, oftentimes in customer success meetups and others, we like to bash sales, like, oh yeah, they set us up for failure. Oh yeah, they're signing customers they shouldn't sign, et cetera, et cetera. But I really believe that an ex-salesperson can be a great CSM. They do need to commit to being a CSM, not just a short-term, I don't want to be on quota thing, but a long-term, I'm going to dig in and really be a product expert. And then they'll come with a bunch of skills that'll help. Management consulting, especially those who are customer-facing, most of them are, really high IQ, understand complex organizations, kind of good at thinking like salespeople, even if they're not salespeople. I know expensive, but at the right level for certain situations might be the right situation. Professional services people, used to dealing with customers, used to setting expectations, used to project management, because CSMs get into that. Pretty good background for customer success. I think support people can be a pretty good background for a customer success manager, but I put one caution on it, and that is support people are naturally reactive. Their whole world as a support person is incoming, support cases to the queue, to the voicemail, to the email. And it's hard to switch out of being reactive into proactive. They can do it, and they come with a lot of good customer-facing skills and product skills, but you have to be careful because they might be a little bit of a fish out of water, at least for a while, when they're trying to adapt to being proactive. And then university should be a great proving grounds. Now, some of us have complex products and need experienced people, that's fine. But at some level, maybe for your less strategic customers, straight out of university, the right people, the right IQ might not be a bad way to go. I've seen that happen. Lots of companies hire CSMs straight out of university. So those are a few ideas. No magic bullets here, no magic wand. Get on LinkedIn, post the job on LinkedIn. There's lots of customer success people or wannabes hanging out there. So I think you'll find people if you get to the right places. And then go to the meetups, do a lot of networking. You'll find people that are actually looking for jobs, not just looking to meet other CSMs. Okay, so we've got 9 minutes left. Sorry, I didn't quite meet my goal of 10. And if there are any questions, Jordan, you can either speak them to me, or I can try to look at the chat. I see one question in Q&A from Scott.
Yeah, we've had a question from Scott Hawkins. He said, does it make sense to segment NPS across high touch, mid touch, and tech touch?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, Scott. I want to make sure I'm not misunderstanding your question. So you say, does it make sense to segment NPS? Here's what I would say is, when you do NPS or any kind of survey, make sure before you send the survey out that you have the recipients of that survey categorized by role. That role could be segment, but also is probably, like, I'll give you Gainsight's example. When we do an NPS survey, we have the roles categorized as executive champion, buyer, admin, power user, and end user. So 5 different roles. So when we get survey results back, we can put them, we can summarize the results by each of those different roles. And you might then be able to add segment to those roles. So high touch power user NPS score is 21. High touch or low touch, tech touch, executive champion NPS score is 8, as an example. I think it's really important. That's why your CRM system has to have a lot of stuff set up in it for you to be successful as a CSM. Or if you buy a system like a Gainsight or something else, it'll help you do some of these things. But it's really important because NPS score, all lumped together, isn't a bad thing, and you'll use that number. But I think it'll be way more valuable if you segment, because you're going to find, like we do, that the difference between our executive champion NPS score and our end user NPS score, wildly different in some cases. So I see another question from Danny. When segmenting on how much they could be paying you, how do you separate out probable revenue versus company net worth? Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think what you want to try to do is figure out what your proxy for the size of your contract could be with that customer. Here's what I mean by that. Let's say you're selling an HR solution and you charge by the number of employees the company has. Well, then that's pretty easy. All you need to do is know the number of employees, have an idea of what the potential there is. And almost every business has something like that. For us, we think about the whole company as potential users of Gainsight. That's not quite true. Engineering teams typically wouldn't use Gainsight, but most everybody else could. So we use company employee count as our proxy for opportunity. So, and we have some dollar amounts, but I'll just make something up. Let's say a deal that we do that has 20 users is 50,000 pounds. Well, if there's 800 people in that company and we know that 300 of them are engineers, then the possible license count is 500. We've only sold 20 licenses. We have a pretty good idea what that opportunity looks like. So we use employee count as our proxy for size of the company, which is our proxy for how much opportunity we have there. So this is a little bit tricky to do, but you got to figure out some proxy that you can get your hands on. You might say my proxy is how many product managers there is at a company. That's going to be pretty hard to find, although if you use LinkedIn really well, you could probably figure it out. But that's the way we think about it. So you got to figure out what is the data we can get our hands on that would tell us. And by the way, that data could be anecdotal from your salespeople. When they sell the deal, they could say, hey, there's a ton of opportunity here because there's 5 other groups that could use our product. Therefore, our opportunity is 5 times what the initial deal was. It could be as simple as that. We try to do it with data that's not anecdotal, but you could certainly use that.
We've got another question from Valley. You say customer success should prioritize product, but what if products don't prioritize customer needs? How would you recommend the customer success manager manage it?
Yeah. some of the rest of you are probably laughing a little bit too, because it often feels this way, right? You want us to prioritize product, but they don't prioritize customers. It's hard to make someone be better at their job, but that's what we're kind of saying. You know, if a product manager doesn't prioritize customer needs, that's not an unreasonable thing, by the way, because sometimes customer needs are very short-sighted. Like I might have customers who say, geez, I wish all of your buttons were blue instead of pink. Well, I'm not going to prioritize that customer need because it's just not important. I will prioritize ones that I deem to be important. So you do have to filter out important from unimportant. And as product managers, you got to think about where is the industry going and how do we keep our product kind of at the leading edge of that. And that's not always doing short-term what customers ask for. But I think what I would say is, you know, try to sync up with the VP of product or whoever is the leader of product and build a relationship with them and just ask them. We get tons of feedback every day from our customers. We know how they're using our product and how they're not using it. How would you like us to bring that information back to your product team or to you? And let them answer that question. Is it in a document? Is it a weekly meeting? Is there some other place to do that? Because I think a leader of product is going to have a really hard time saying, I don't care what customers think. That's even if that's what they're thinking, that's probably not what they would say. And if you're going to bring honest, open customer feedback and CSM feedback to the product team, that's going to be really hard to ignore. That voice of the customer holds a lot of weight. And if the CEO found out that the VP of product didn't want to hear customer feedback, I got to believe that wouldn't be a good thing. So, you know, I get where you're coming from, but it's probably not quite as bad as you think.
And then we have a question from Ali Edwards from Cousin Hub. So being a startup company, would you say the percentage of customer success managers needs to be higher to start with and later down the line, i.e. pre-Series A?
I missed the first part of the question, Jordan.
Being a startup company, would you say the percentage of customer success managers needs to be higher to start with than later down the line?
Yes. Good question, Ali. Thanks for asking it. This is really important. If you're a small company, like pre-Series A, or even I would say Series A company, I would argue with your CEO that he should be over-investing in customer success. Because what's the reality at a company at that stage? A few things. Product is not where it needs to be. Processes are almost certainly not where they need to be. And so you need to plug those gaps. And the way you plug them typically is with customer success people. Now, some people will love that job. Some people will hate that job. But the reality is a CSM is going to plug a lot of holes at an early stage company. And so I'll give you an example. The rule of thumb in the industry is one CSM should be managing kind of 10 times their cost in ARR. So if you're paying me £100,000 a year, I should be managing £1 million of ARR, of annual recurring revenue. Early on, that number might not be 10 to 1, it might be 4 to 1. That's what it was at Gainsight. 3 years ago, we had a 25% investment in customer success. So 25% of our ARR as a company was in customer success. And then over the last few years, we've been working that number towards that 10% number, which is, we think, is the healthy number. So exactly what you said, Ali, start with a bigger investment, and then with the intention as you grow of moving towards a more efficient model where it's not quite as expensive. Because sooner or later your CFO will say, no, you can't have that many people for that many customers. You got to get more efficient, more productive. So 3:00. Jordan, I don't know if there's one more question. We can do a quick one. Otherwise, we're right at the top of the hour.
Yeah, if anyone has any more questions, then do send them through now. Otherwise, do get in touch with me or with Dan directly, and you know, we can try our best. But thank you very much, Dan. Very well put and really informative. So that was fantastic.
Yeah, you're welcome, Jordan. Thanks, everybody. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, please do that. I'll send my slides to Jordan. And you can send any questions that you guys have directly over to me, or you can ask them to me on LinkedIn, and I'll follow up with answers and send that out to everybody in case somebody else was wondering the same thing.
Brilliant.
I hope this was helpful for everybody. Thanks again for
thanks very much.
soon. Okay, thanks, everybody.
All right, have a good afternoon.